everyone, and welcome to Right Reason, the show where we reason rightly, meaning, of course, that there's a right and a wrong reason, and there's a way to get to the right and wrong, and that's the whole point of the show. The show is, of course, built around Dr. Charlie Rice, University of Notre Dame Law School, Professor Emeritus. What does emeritus mean?
E means out of it. Meritus means deservedly.
So, deservedly out of it. Anyway.
It's true. It's true.
Welcome, Doctor.
It's true. Good. Right.
Anyway, we're going to talk, as you know, if you followed any of the shows we've had in the past, or matter of fact, if this is the first one you happen to be seeing, we really talk about sort of the Catholic intellectual tradition sort of writ large over all sorts of things like natural law, conscience, unjust laws, all these sorts of things, that there is objective morality, how do we know what's right and wrong, all these kinds of things, because all of these matter. Why? They matter because we have to make decisions, moral decisions, and it's on those moral decisions in which we'll be judged, and our eternal lives will hang in the balance. So it's no small potatoes there.
Right.
So let's talk. The church is constantly saying that you can't do something just by your conscience. You have to have a rightly formed conscience.
Right.
So let's talk about conscience in this show. When we say conscience, this is a lot of people think that just whatever I decide kind of is right and wrong, however I feel. Wrong. What does the church mean when the church says conscience?
Conscience, says Thomas Aquinas, is an act by which you judge the rightness or wrongness of a particular action. John Stuart Mill, for example, the utilitarian, said the reason can know right or wrong in the abstract, but reason can't judge the rightness or wrongness of a particular action. Well, that's not true.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
That's not true.
We don't live in the abstract. We live in the here and the now.
Right. And the question, the big question on conscience is actually, what is it? Mm-hmm. Or it's an act. Is it a judgment or a decision? Mm-hmm. Is it an act of the intellect or simply an act of the will? Where what you're doing is making a decision. And or is it, on the other hand, a judgment, which is a judgment as to objective truth, which can be right or wrong. John Paul, in Veritatis Splendor, dealt with this at length. And he said, in our culture, the kinds of things we've been talking about, in our culture, conscience has come to be regarded as solely a personal decision. Mm-hmm. Whatever I decide is right for me. And this has the epistemological root that nobody can know objective truth. So you have to ask yourself, okay, well, what is conscience? Is it does it have some relation to objective truth? Does it have some relation to God? Or is it simply me, myself, and I making the decision as to what I want to do at this time? Mm-hmm. All right? And it makes a huge difference. Because if that's all it is, then it's really kind of trivialized.
Right.
You see? And the question we have in our legal system and cultural system is, why is conscience important?
Right.
Is it important? Now, we're not saying that conscience should give you the right to go out and commit mass murder because your conscience says you should. That's not what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. We're talking about the question of whether conscience is so important that it can be recognized in some cases as giving you an immunity to otherwise compulsory laws.
Mm-hmm. Give me an example. What's a concrete
military
example?
Service.
Okay.
If you, suppose you have a draft reinstated, all right? The American law, U.S. law, provides that you can get exemption by reason of conscience. It was a religious objection by religious training and belief, and the Supreme Court has interpreted that so that now is any belief other than purely political or essentially that philosophical that has the same position in the life of the objector that a religious belief would have in the life of a religious objector. But you can get the objection, the exemption under American law only if you object to all wars. All right? If you're a universal pacifist.
Okay.
If your position is, hey, look, I'm not opposed to all wars, but I'd rather not go to this one.
Right.
All right? You don't get the exemption.
Okay.
So
We're talking about conscientious objectors here.
to yes, to
Okay.
military service,
Okay.
compulsory military service, and they can be required to do alternative things. But the question got asked was, well, why? Why is that so important?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if conscience is simply your decision, having no relation to an objective moral order, simply your preference, your taste, why should you have an objection, an exemption? So you're going to draft me into the Army? Well, I really don't like camis. I don't like camouflage uniforms. Is that the reason for an objection?
You make
No.
me look fat.
No objection, no. So the if that's all it is that a purely personal decision.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that so important? See, and the reality is that what it is a judgment as to the rightness or wrongness of a particular act. As Father John Hardin used to explain it, he said, well, your your conscience can be clear or it can be doubtful.
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, it can be right or it can be wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Your conscience judgment. All right? So the teaching of the church and the Christian tradition is that conscience is a judgment as to the rightness or wrongness, an act by which we judge the rightness or wrongness of a particular act. And it imposes duties on us.
When we talk about having a properly formed conscience,
Right.
Some people will say, well, that's kind of church speak for saying, well, you have to form your conscience with the church. So in other words, you're propagandizing your mind. So of course you wind up with just, of course you're going to have to in conscience agree with the church because you've shoved the church into your conscience. So any decision you make is going to be, well, that's what the church says.
Right.
But that's not really sort of properly understood of what the church means
No,
by
it's not.
informed,
It's
right?
not. And
So what does the church mean when it says inform your conscience?
Well, it look, if you have a Chevy Malibu, right?
Correct.
If you were going to upgrade and buy something else, right? How would you make up your mind as to what to buy? Would you go down to the local supermarket and ask the guy bagging the groceries? All right? No, you'd form your conscience by going to the source, going to the authority, going to somebody who could tell you what the pros and cons are and all the rest. Well, that's how you form any judgment.
Sure.
Judgment whether to go to a particular school or whatever. And forming your conscience means that you do that same thing, all right? And again, it depends on what it is, all right?
Well, isn't the crux of the matter really is that people have sort of, they've carved out some things in, the contemporary world has carved out some things as these, even though they may deny objectivity, they still live as though there is. They don't subjectively decide to pay their mortgage each month. They objectively pay it or they will objectively lose their house.
That's true.
And they objectively know that, so they objectively do what they need to do. But over here in this little realm of conscience and religion and morality, and it all becomes all squishy and becomes just personal opinion, as though there is no objective reality attached to any of this.
Yeah.
And we've talked in other shows philosophically how we sort of got off the track on that. But, isn't this sort of the same thing plaguing this question of conscience right now?
Yeah. Okay, let's go through your three obligations with
Sure.
respect to conscience. Your first obligation is to form it,
Correct.
all right? And the second obligation, now watch the language here, is to follow it if it's clear, even if you've improperly formed it.
Okay.
If your conscience is clear, of course, you must follow your conscience.
Nagging doubt.
Well, that's the third.
Right.
But the second, let's stick with the second for the moment. Here's that coffee cup, all right? If for some reason my judgment of conscience is that I must, not just that I may, but I must take that cup and bring it to Mishawaka, Indiana, as mine.
Which we would call stealing.
It's true. But if my judgment is that I must do that, then of course I have to follow that judgment. All right? I can be culpable for forming it incorrectly. And that's your second duty with respect to your conscience. Your third duty is never act on a doubtful conscience. That's an oversimplified way of expressing it, but the way the Catechism discusses it, it says that this duty means that if you're in doubt, I should take that. No, I shouldn't take it. Yeah, I should take it. I'll teach this guy a lesson. No, I shouldn't take it. I'm in doubt. The one thing I know is that if I don't take it, I'm not doing wrong.
Right.
All right? So the first thing you do is try to resolve the doubt. And if you're in doubt, to use the Latin term tutior, T-U-T-I-O-R, pars, you take the safer course.
Right.
All right? So those are your three duties. You form your conscience, you never act on a doubtful conscience, but if you form your conscience, you form your conscience, you act on your conscience if it's clear. Third, you never act on a doubtful conscience. All right? Good example was given, and we've talked about this in a previous episode, by Cardinal Ratzinger, then Cardinal Ratzinger, in 1991 when he gave his talk to all the bishops of the United States in Dallas. And he was talking about conscience. And he started out the talk by mentioning that he had heard somebody say that Hitler and Stalin may be saints, right? And he said, well, how do we know? I mean, ultimately, only God can judge. But his conclusion was that, at the very least, they formed their consciences incorrectly.
Right.
All right? Because conscience, as Pope Benedict XVI has explained so often, we have a false idea of authority. That's why our culture rejects the authority of the church, because this is individualist liberalism, really. The false idea of authority is that authority is something coming from outside to oppress me,
Right.
to force me to do something. All right? And Cardinal Ratzinger said, no, the function of the papacy with respect to conscience is different. The function of the papacy is to recall to the person, you or to me, the anamnesis, which, as we've talked about before, the amnesia means forgetfulness. An is the negative. It means the remembrance of the way things were before the fall. And the function of the Pope, of the papacy, is to help us to recall what it is that we should do.
Right.
All right? And it appeals to our freedom. But we have to be free to act morally. But freedom is also related to the truth. And so the function of the papacy with respect to conscience is to assist us in making that judgment.
Well, we're going to take a quick break here, but when we come back, the judgment, I think if there was one thing that really in the last, whatever it was, maybe 40 or 50 years that has really kind of hit the church on the question of conscience.
Contraception.
Contraception, when so many clergy and priests simply, they just miss the boat on this, and bishops too, just saying, Well, as long as your conscience, we're going to get into that.
Well, you never get into controversial things.
Never get into controversial things. That's why we're going to break new ground in the second half of this show. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Hello and welcome back to Right Reason. Here's a question for you. How free or clear or clean is your conscience? What does that mean? I don't know. We're going to ask Dr. Rice if he's got a good conscience right now. No. We're talking about conscience and the Catholic understanding of what it is, which is, of course, the right understanding of what it is. Conscience has been, the idea, and a bad idea of conscience, has been appealed to in the church in the last 50 years by clerics in the church, trying to answer people's questions specific about how should I live with regard to X, Y, or Z, whatever moral choice I'm going to make. The biggie, of course, the big gorilla in the room is contraception.
Right.
How many priests and clergy said, well, pray over it, and if that's your conscience tells you it's okay, it's okay. Were they misstating the church's understanding about conscience?
I think so.
Okay.
And when that issue comes up, I recall what the late Cardinal Wright said at the time that Humanae Vitae was issued.
Mm-hmm. The Pope's encyclical,
yes,
restating the church's long-standing
not just the church's long-standing, but the traditional Christian position, which
and Jewish tradition,
right? Which until 1930, no Christian sect had ever denied. The Anglican Lambeth Conference denied it, but Cardinal Wright, I think I'm recalling his words correctly, issued a public statement. I think he was in Rome at some office there, and he said, after explaining what the encyclical was, he said, "I do not see how any believing Catholic could form a clear conscience in contradiction to this encyclical." And I think that that just states it so clearly. Mm-hmm. You say, well, wait a minute, I have to follow my conscience. Yeah, you have to follow your conscience if it's clear.
Right.
And if you're in doubt, you try to resolve the doubt. And if you can't resolve the doubt, you take the safer course.
Right.
Well, how, given this restatement of the absolutely unbroken tradition of the Church, given this clear restatement of it, how can you say that you have a clear conscience formed in direct contradiction to that?
Right.
That was Cardinal Wright's statement.
Well, I think what you'll hear from people, certainly, when we go out to different talks and things like this come up, and we get emails and things here, what we hear an awful lot, and we know we're going to talk about this in another show, but just to touch on it right now, is that in order to form a clear conscience, you need to be able to have correct information. And if there has been a problem in the last 50 years, it's that the information has not been there. Bad information has been there by the truckload.
Right.
But somehow that's been allowed to bury the good information.
Well, that's the result of the collapse of Catholic education over the past 60 or 70 years.
Yeah. It's been,
and there's no question about that.
It's been a disaster. But is there something in the human makeup, in human nature, that if we are sitting facing a question over a moral good or bad and choosing, is there something in us that inherently kind of hits the pause button and says, maybe this doesn't quite seem right or whatever? Is that, you talk to tons of Catholics today and it doesn't even occur to them that something's immoral about contraception. Tons of people, period, forget Catholics, everybody. There's nothing wrong with contraception. There's nothing wrong with shacking up. There's not just, it's what everyone do. And it doesn't even, the question never even pops in their mind.
Right. Well, take two things are relevant there. One is that point that Cardinal Ratzinger made about anamnesis, which is the remembrance of the way things were. It's kind of like the first inclination of human nature, which is to seek the good. All right, you have inside of you, he says, inside of you this kind of memory of what it ought to be.
Mm-hmm.
So that when you see
Because it once was.
Yeah, before the fall.
Right.
You see a proposition, you see a statement, you say, yeah, that's it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that is what the papacy appeals to.
Yeah.
That's what Cardinal Ratzinger said, and it's a really interesting thing. In 1991, Dallas, the American bishops, and he said, if there were no conscience, you wouldn't need the papacy. That's why Cardinal Newman's toast, he
If there was
endorsed.
no conscience?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You wouldn't need, because the purpose of the papacy in
Right.
this area is to form conscience, all right?
Mm-hmm.
As Benedict said in Deus Caritas Est, his first encyclical, the role of the church in public life is not political, but is rather to form consciences,
Right.
help form consciences.
Mm-hmm.
And it does that by appealing to people, by recalling to them what is the truth about the moral life. All right, so that's what it is. But now the problem is that, as Aquinas recognized, and which is obviously true, that your conscience can be dulled, it can be obscured by vice, by bad habits, by faulty education.
Mm-hmm.
And we have had generations coming through the misbegotten today Catholic school system.
So-called.
And in many ways, they're trying to improve it.
Yeah.
And there are some good signs. But for decades, that school system focused on making collages, right? And pictures and doing that kind of thing.
I sat in those classes firsthand.
Yeah,
I am
right.
well aware of the felt banners and
Oh, yeah.
couldn't have told you
banners
any theology in freshman year in high school, but I could tell you what glue works best with sparkles.
yeah. But those are generations, so that the parents of the subsequent kids can't help them out because they haven't been taught.
Yeah.
See?
It's interesting the number of younger people we get here who are saying that they, in their 20s-ish, mid to late 20s, are saying that they're talking to their parents, telling their parents about the faith. It's like, instead of going like this, it went,
I know.
stop, and it's going back up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I get that reaction from law students.
Yeah.
These are really neat people. They're great, but rarely. I teach the Thomas Aquinas course and compare it with positivism and all the rest of that.
Mm-hmm.
And we get into Aquinas as seen through the teachings of the church, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we get into all this stuff. And rarely have I failed to have some kid come up to me toward the end of the course and say, I have spent 8, 12, 13, 15 years in Catholic schools, and I never heard any of this.
Right.
That's a newsflash
Yeah.
to them. So there's a great work to be done, and the recent popes, the popes have been
Yeah.
showing us the way. See, and there really is some indication that the bishops are trying to restore some integrity to Catholic education, but.
There's a lot of rubble to clear out of the way first.
I know. I think. Hey, listen. I think one of the most encouraging things is the growth of the Catholic homeschool movement,
Yeah.
because that started as an evangelical thing,
Mm-hmm.
and now there's a strong and relatively flourishing
Yeah.
Catholic homeschool movement.
That sounds like a good topic for a discussion on another show on education.
Oh yeah. But the homeschoolers, you might say they're going to end up running the country because they could read and write. They can, and they have a foundation.
Yeah, it's interesting when we go to. It's probably not very surprising that some of the. If we go out and give talks in different places, some of the, I wouldn't say majority, but a representation of the audience is made up of homeschoolers and either parents or kids.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how just on it these 10 and 12-year-olds are. You look at them and you're like, is this what it used to be like 100 years
That's
ago?
right. It was.
Is this what it was?
Yeah.
I wasn't alive 100 years ago, but
Yeah,
I was like, wow, they know. And it's not just knowing, like they can actually discuss and extrapolate ideas with you based on their knowledge, which is the whole point of knowledge.
Right.
And you have that much, well, that's how you inform your conscience. You have to inform your conscience with information, correct information. The fact that they know this, it's stunning. It really is stunning. When you look around the current culture, you're like, what does a kid know today for the most part? Not much.
I was at a law school, which will remain unnamed, some time ago, a few months ago, giving a talk, and met this kid who was first in his class, first out of 267. Huh. And he was
can see where this is going.
Now he was a graduate of Patrick Henry College, which is the evangelical homeschooling college in Virginia. Mm-hmm. And that's a pattern that you see developing, because if you're if you're fortunate enough to have a good Catholic school system, by all means use it.
Oh, sure.
As we have been in it with our kids, but one of the good signs is that there is a Catholic homeschool movement.
Yeah.
But how can you form conscience, right, with any integrity and with any coherence, if you don't know the basic teachings by which you're supposed to inform it? Mm-hmm. Right? That's the problem.
Yeah, it does seem to be a sort of a prevalent issue. It's so basic, it's almost difficult to talk about it. How can you sit in, those desks you buy, office furniture you put together yourself? You open up the box, and if you don't know what the thing is you're trying to build, how do you know if there's any pieces missing? And if there's no directions manual, how do you know what you're trying to build? And how do you know how to put it together? You just see things. I mean, people get they'll look around the culture and they'll see, on the news. I worked in news for eons. There is a basic philosophical acceptance of the idea that to go into a neighborhood and just do a drive-by shooting and gun down 4 children in a house is a bad thing. Yeah. But there's never a thought of why. Yeah, why is that a bad thing? I don't know, it just is because it is. Well, nothing is just because it is, unless it comes in God. Yeah. Nothing is just because it is. It's always related to something else. And, the idea of my conscience is just open to me because I get to do whatever I want because I can. Right. That's just absurd. Yeah. That's absurd.
Yeah, one of the areas, Micah, which there's a real need for formation is in the political conscience.
Oh, sure. Pope Benedict has said this repeatedly.
The Vatican is, insistent upon this, that you have to form a Catholic conscience, and you have to vote with a Catholic conscience. Bishop Jenke of Peoria was emphatic about that.
Absolutely, and as he should be.
Yes, because
as all the bishops should be.
Yeah, because you're making a judgment as to a moral act, and that moral act is the act of voting. Huh? So, and
very quickly, why is voting a moral act?
It's a moral act because the people you're electing have responsibility for the common good, right? And that's what law is all about.
Right. And
if you put people in there, if you intentionally put a bad guy in, you're formally cooperating with evil. That is intrinsically evil to do that.
Because he can help contribute to the destruction of the common good.
That's correct.
Right.
And if you vote for somebody out of mistake or faulty reasoning or whatever, you don't want to do a bad thing.
Right.
That's material cooperation, but it still can be wrong if you failed to form your judgment correctly.
We've only got a minute left here, but give us what the church means, since this is directly related to conscience. Give us what the church means when it says, we've got 1 minute. What does the church mean when it says the common good?
Common good in the Catechism has these elements. The first thing it requires is peace, right? Respect for the person, and what is broadly called development. That is the opportunity to live and to achieve and produce.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, the first one listed is respect for the person, and then peace and development. And the common good is a set of conditions which enables the person to fulfill his or her purpose,
Okay.
right? It's a set of conditions, and those are the three requirements, right? Respect for the person, peace, and broadly speaking, development.
So it's not everybody gets to do whatever anybody
Oh, no,
wants
no,
to do.
no. It's related to what we've been talking about this whole series,
Exactly.
which is the moral law, which is objective.
Mm-hmm.
But those are the elements of the common good as expressed in the Catechism.
And you get to the common good and make the right decisions by following a well-informed, good conscience. That's
True.
clear.
True. And you form that conscience by paying attention to the Vicar of Christ.
Absolutely. Doctor,
No, yeah.
thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
We are running out of time as usual. We always run out of time on the show.
All right. All right.
All right, we're wrapping up with Dr. Rice and our show Right Reason, how you reason rightly. And we hope this is of great benefit to you sitting at home and watching and paying attention. It's all part of the great Catholic tradition, the great intellectual Catholic tradition of understanding that there is objective right and wrong, objective morality. And, look, it's our soul's in the balance here. And you got to choose correctly. As I said at the end of Indiana Jones, chose poorly and his head blew up. God bless you. We'll see you next time on Right Reason.